The way my husband Chris looked at my younger sister, Julia, looking back now, perhaps it was inevitable that I would eventually realize it wasn't the kind of gentle gaze one reserves for a sister-in-law. Because I loved him, because I trusted him, I was acutely sensitive to the faint chill seeping through those tiny cracks. My soul reacted instinctively. The first sense of unease was over something truly small. It was a weekend. We had invited my parents and Julia over for a home party. While I was alone in the kitchen clearing away a mountain of glasses, I heard Julia's cheerful laughter drifting in from the patio, followed by Chris's warm voice in response. As far as I knew, Chris's tone with Julia had always been politely distant. But at that time, I could hear a gentleness in his voice that felt unfamiliar, almost intimate. Maybe I was imagining things. That's what I told myself until I stepped out onto the patio. Chris noticed me immediately and said, "Thanks for all your hard work, Mandy." "You must be tired," his voice a touch louder and quicker than usual. The perfect timing. The perfect smile. Something in the corner of my heart gave a sharp, almost imperceptible sting. There was no physical closeness between them. But the moment I appeared, the air between them shifted like a curtain being pulled shut. The intimacy evaporated, replaced by the bland, ordinary air of brother-in-law and sister-in-law. That flawless change of atmosphere left me with an indescribable sense of wrongness. To anyone else, it would have been nothing. A misunderstanding, maybe? Yet those tiny thorn-like moments had been pricking at me for months. One night, Chris said he'd be late because of a sudden meeting. Feeling the loneliness of another solitary dinner, I decided to invite Julia out to eat. She declined with a voice that sounded genuinely regretful. "Sorry, something urgent just came up at work, but I promise I'll make it up to you next time." Once would be a coincidence. Twice or three times in a single month, that no longer felt like coincidence. A quiet alarm began to ring in the back of my mind. Sometimes small fragments of information would line up in strange ways. One weekend morning, over coffee, Chris said, "I heard there's a great new jazz bar downtown. We should check it out sometime." It was unusual for him to mention such a niche place at all. A few days later, while chatting with Julia on the phone, she said excitedly, "Hey, I found this amazing new bar the other day." When I asked the name, it was the exact same bar Chris had mentioned. What a coincidence. Chris knew about that place too. When I said it casually, I thought I heard Julia draw in a sharp breath on the other end of the line. But she quickly laughed in an overly bright tone. "No way. That's crazy. I guess we really do have similar tastes? Coincidence. Chance." Those were always the words they used. But in my mind, the puzzle pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture I didn't want to see. They were lying, deceiving me carefully, deliberately. That certainty pushed me forward. My heart was quietly screaming. I couldn't hold it in any longer, so one night I decided to confide in my parents. With my father there, I gathered my courage and began. "Mom, lately I feel like Chris and Julia are a little too close. It's making me really uneasy." The moment I spoke, my mother let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Mandy, not this again. You've always been too sensitive. Julia's your only sister, and to Chris she's just his sister-in-law. Of course they get along." Always. That word pierced me. Yes, I had always been assigned the role of overly sensitive sister in this family. Anytime I voiced a concern, it was brushed aside as overthinking or being too emotional. My feelings had always been treated as an inconvenient disruption to the family's harmony. My father, who had been listening silently, added with exasperation, "She's getting married soon, you know? Throwing around some ridiculous suspicion will only make things awkward for everyone. You're just not in a stable state of mind right now." It was true, Julia was engaged to a high-profile executive at a major tech company. Anyone would think there's no way she'd do something like that. But my father's words pierced my heart like a cold, sharp blade. "No, that's not it. But when every single member of your family tells you the same thing, a terrifying thought begins to creep in: maybe I'm the one who's wrong. They trampled over my anxiety, my instincts, without a second thought. And in their eyes, there was no trace of concern, only the cold glint reserved for something troublesome. That was the moment it began, my one-person battle. In the airtight room called family, I began to suffocate quietly. My concerns were dismissed with a single "you're imagining things." My unease was relabeled as emotional instability. They banded together and closed in on me with practiced precision. If I pointed out Chris and Julia's unnatural closeness, my mother would say, "It's because you doubt them that they seem awkward," blaming me. My father would slam the table and bark, "Enough already." Before long, I had become the problem in this house. Maybe I really was the one who wasn't normal. That night, as I started to doubt myself for the first time, I realized something. If I wanted to protect my sanity and dignity, I had to fight. Past midnight, in the darkness of the living room, the only light on my face came from the pale glow of my laptop. With trembling fingers, I typed into the search bar, "Private Investigator Los Angeles." I wandered through dozens of websites until my eyes caught on one named Smith Investigations. The website was plain, almost austere, but it radiated a quiet confidence in pursuing nothing but the truth. Clinging to this last shred of hope, I typed into the contact form, "Please investigate my husband and my sister." A few days later, I met the man who called himself Smith in a cafe downtown. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a worn leather jacket and a few days' stubble, but his sharp eyes made it feel like nothing could escape his notice. I told him my story haltingly, desperately. How my family had isolated me, how I felt like I was on the verge of losing my mind. He didn't interrupt, he just sipped his coffee and listened. When I'd finished, he exhaled slowly and said, "Mandy, human intuition is often right. When someone lies, there's always a seam, a flaw. All you need after that is proof." Those words saved me more than I can describe. For the first time, someone believed me and was willing to stand on my side. I paid him from what little savings I had left. This was my final investment in saving my own soul. The days after the investigation began were unbearable. I forced myself to smile at Chris, as if nothing was wrong, to have dinner with my family on the weekends, all while my thoughts were consumed with waiting for Smith's updates. And then the day came. My phone buzzed softly. An email from Smith. Subject: First report. I rushed into the bathroom and locked the door. Leaning back against the wall, I took a deep breath. With trembling fingers, I opened the email and found several photos attached. The first, Chris's familiar car entering the underground parking garage of a luxury hotel in the city. The second, Julia stepping out of the passenger seat. She wore sunglasses to shield her face, but there was no mistaking her. The third, the two of them stepping into the hotel elevator, Chris's arm wrapped around Julia's waist. The fourth, their backs as they entered a hotel room together. My breath stopped. The world went silent. The only sound left the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't cry. Instead of grief, a searing, consuming rage at their betrayal took hold of my entire body. I called Smith immediately, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Keep going. Track the money too, can you do that?" From the start of our marriage, Chris had taken full control of our joint account, saying, "I'm good with money, let me handle it." I was beginning to suspect that trust had backfired. If I tried to investigate myself, Chris would catch on, so it was impossible for me to trace the complicated flow of money. That's why I had to leave it to Smith. A few days later, his second report arrived and shattered the last sliver of hope I'd been holding on to. It showed that over the past 6 months, more than $100,000 had been withdrawn from our joint account regularly, almost like a monthly bill. And the destination of those transfers? The business account of a corporation registered under Julia's name. Under purpose of account, it read, "Funding for lingerie brand launch." Oh, so that's what it was. The money I had scraped and saved cutting back on expenses, thinking of our future, had been siphoned away by my husband to fund my sister's dream. The same dream Julia had gushed about recently, eyes sparkling, telling me I'm starting my own brand. That dream had been built on my sacrifices. But it wasn't just a dream, it was dirty money, meant to build their private little love nest. And that wasn't the end of it. What was written next was even more horrifying. Smith had also recovered message logs between Chris and my parents. From Chris, Mandy's starting to suspect. Try to throw her off. From my mother, don't worry, she's always been prone to overthinking. If we tell her otherwise, she'll believe us. From my father, just until Julia's brand takes off. Don't stir things up now. Blood running cold doesn't even come close. It felt like my entire bloodstream was flowing backwards. But hell wasn't done with me yet. The final section of the report contained screenshots of messages Chris and Julia had each sent to their respective friends. From Julia to her friend Chris? Of course I'll cut it off after I'm married. He's already given me the startup money, I'm done. I'm not going to keep seeing some married guy with no ambition forever. From Chris to his friend, Julia getting married? Even better. That thrill of being with someone's wife, her husband, will be the perfect cover. And nothing will change between us. She's not capable of leaving me. There was no love here. Julia had been using Chris as a convenient lover and a bank account until she could marry her elite fiancé, while Chris believed he'd still own her even after she wed. They weren't even in love, they were ugly co-conspirators, using each other to satisfy their own desires and trampling me in the process. And it wasn't just my husband and my sister. My own parents, the only two I had been in on it from the start, deceiving me, painting me as some unstable lunatic, and draining my assets. They weren't my family. They were parasites infesting my life. My anger hardened into a silent hatred, my heart freezing over into permafrost. In the midst of that despair, my phone rang. My mother's voice, bright and cheerful, told me Julia's wedding date had been set. Shortly after, I received a pristine white invitation. The ceremony and reception would be held at a seaside resort, a perfect location, with sapphire waters and white sand. Clutching the invitation, I smiled coldly. The pinnacle of false happiness. The crowning achievement of a family built on lies. It was the perfect stage for revenge. Julia planned to marry another man, cut ties with Chris, and start a new life with the brand she had built on my stolen money. My family knew all of it and still planned to toast her with smiles, pretending ignorance, leaving me as the fool on the sidelines. I will never forgive them, ever. I called Smith immediately to lay out my final plan. Let's make it the best show. He agreed without hesitation. Understood. I'll get everything we need. On the day, I'll be there, disguised as part of the staff. From that day on, I began preparing for revenge. Using Smith's evidence, photos, bank records, and even short hotel security footage of them walking arm in arm through the lobby, we assembled it all into one devastating video. As the countdown to the wedding began, I played the perfect sister. I went with Julia to choose her dress, told her, "You look beautiful," and smiled as she talked about her happiness. In front of my parents, I was the same Mandy they'd always known. No one suspected that deep in my chest, the flames of vengeance were burning, silent but fierce. And then, the wedding day arrived. The sky was a piercing blue, the sea a shimmering turquoise, sunlight pouring through the glass walls of the chapel. The seaside resort was almost too beautiful an immaculate stage for a false blessing. Dressed in pure white, Julia looked every bit the angel, smiling innocently beside her groom. Our parents gazed at them with misty eyes, a picture of proud joy. The whole scene was like a perfect painting, perfect, except for me. The reception began in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel. Opulent decorations, jubilant music, the laughter of guests, it was all a carefully orchestrated illusion. I sat quietly at the edge of a table, waiting. My fingers traced the rim of a champagne glass I couldn't bring myself to drink, my eyes moving from my sister, the glowing bride, to the smiling groom at her side. to my parents pretending to be overcome with emotion, and finally to my husband, Chris. I burned each face into my memory. When the sentimental how they met video ended, the room was filled with warm, easy emotion. That was my cue. I caught Smith's eye. He was disguised as a waiter in the corner, and gave the slightest nod. He returned it, slipping a small remote from his pocket. In the next instant, the lights went out. A hush fell over the ballroom as the giant screen lit up again. Most people must have thought it was part of the wedding slideshow, a surprise continuation. But what appeared on the screen was not words of blessing. Grainy hotel security footage appeared, showing an elevator interior. Standing inside were my husband, Chris, and today's bride, my sister, Julia. Even though she was engaged at the time, her arms were looped around Chris's neck as she kissed him passionately. Chris's hands gripped her waist, pulling her closer as he kissed her back. The ballroom froze. The cheerful music and laughter vanished, replaced by a silence so complete it was deafening. I could see the blood drain from the faces of the guests. The groom stared between the screen and Julia as if he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing, his expression twisting into a mask of fury and despair. The footage continued. The screen switched to a close-up of transaction records from my and Chris's joint bank account. Over $100,000 transferred to Julia Holdings, LLC. A crisp, clinical male voice Smith narrated over the images. These funds were transferred without the consent of Mrs. Mandy Ford, by Mr. Chris Ford. I rose slowly to my feet and took the microphone. My hands no longer shook. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the bride you just saw kissing my husband in that video, my own sister Julia. My voice carried clear and sharp through the stunned silence. I turned my gaze to my parents, who stood pale and frozen. Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry my so-called emotional instability caused this. But you can rest easy. Every dollar I scraped and saved went to fund my sister's lovely lingerie brand. Isn't that just the most touching example of family love? My mother's voice came out in a strangled whisper. Stop, Mandy, please. My father covered his face with both hands. Chris shouted, "This is wrong. It's a setup." But no one was listening. A setup? Oh yes, that's exactly what it is, a trap. One I've spent months building. Just for you. I pointed at the screen. That is the truth. The record of the crimes you committed behind my back, while calling me a liar and a lunatic. It was as if my words flipped a switch. Julia, who had been weeping silently, suddenly turned on Chris, her voice shrill and furious. This is your fault. You're the one who told me, don't worry, Mandy's naive. She'll never figure it out. Chris's face twisted into something almost demonic as he shouted back at Julia. What did you just say, you tramp? Who was it that came crawling to me for money? You were planning to marry that rich guy and toss me aside all along. The two of them erupted into a vile shouting match, hurling accusations and insults like weapons. They looked less like human beings than rabid animals. I watched their grotesque display coolly, then lifted the microphone again. My voice cut through their shouting, quiet but carrying across the entire room. Look, everyone. This is my husband and my sister's true love. Every eye turned toward me. They were never in love. They just used each other, Julia. You mocked Chris behind his back as a useless man with no ambition. And Chris, you told your friends she'd never be able to leave you. Isn't that right? I gave Smith the signal, and he played my final trump card on the screen. Huge white letters appeared, displaying the messages Chris and Julia had sent to their friends, betraying each other in their own words. Chris? Of course I'll cut it off after I'm married. The thrill of being with a married woman? Nothing will change between us. Faced with undeniable proof, the two of them were struck speechless, standing frozen, their faces drained of color. How beautiful. What a touching love story. You really are the perfect pair of parasites. The moment I said it, the groom, who had been standing there in stunned silence, finally moved. Without a word, he ripped the engagement ring off Julia's finger and hurled it to the floor. There's no way I'm marrying a woman like you." With that, he turned sharply on his heel and strode toward the exit. The ballroom filled with the guests' contemptuous sighs and hushed, scornful whispers. Some, unwilling to miss a scandal of this magnitude, kept their phones raised, recording everything. The clicks of shutters and murmured commentary filled the air. By tomorrow, I knew this footage would be all over the internet, likely under a hashtag like "wedding from hell." Their social lives ended here, at this very moment. I watched the carnage with cold, detached eyes. The false family that had rotted me from the inside for years, the web of lies and betrayal that bound us, it was all collapsing, piece by piece, at my hands. And the sound of that collapse was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I set the microphone down gently on the table, then turned and walked alone toward the exit, leaving the chaos behind me. As I pushed open the heavy doors, the cool evening breeze brushed against my cheek. I never looked back. This was freedom, the beginning of my new life. 3 months after that hellish wedding, my world had settled into the calm after the storm. With a lawyer by my side, I proceeded calmly but without an ounce of mercy through every legal channel available. Against Chris, I filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery. I also pursued criminal fraud charges for the embezzlement of our shared funds, seeking damages of over $100,000. He tried to resist payment, but the footage from the wedding was indisputable. His denials meant nothing. Against Julia, I filed a claim for emotional damages as a co-conspirator in the affair. She reportedly cried to anyone who would listen that Chris had led her astray, but the footage of their passionate kiss in that hotel elevator made such excuses sound laughable. Even when I didn't want to hear it, the gossip reached me through mutual acquaintances. Chris's employer learned of the scandal almost immediately. He was fired on the spot. His reputation was ruined, making any future employment nearly impossible. To pay the compensation and damages, his luxury car, high-end watches, and every last symbol of his vanity were seized. Lately, I heard he's been spotted by former co-workers, living alone in a dingy downtown apartment, sifting through supermarket clearance bins with vacant eyes, his once confident smile long gone. Julia's downfall was even harsher. The engagement was, of course, broken off, and her former fiancé's prestigious family sued her for tarnishing their name, demanding a large settlement. Her dream of launching her lingerie brand with my stolen money evaporated into dust, along with a mountain of debt. The public's fascination with her humiliation never faded. Branded the worst bride in history, she shut down all her social media accounts. Recently, I heard she's been taking night shifts as a janitor, hiding her face as much as possible. Both of them have tried contacting me repeatedly. "Please, Mandy, you're my sister. I want to make things right. I can't live without you." I never replied to the pathetic, pleading messages they left on my voicemail. I deleted them all without a second thought. Then one day, my apartment's doorbell rang. On the video intercom screen appeared my father and mother, aged so drastically in the past few months they looked like entirely different people. For a while, I considered saying nothing, just waiting for them to give up and leave. But even when the rain began to fall, they didn't move from in front of my door. At last, to end things once and for all, I opened the heavy door. My mother nearly collapsed at the sight of me, and my father caught her arm to keep her upright. "Mandy." His voice, once so full of authority, was thin and weak. "And what exactly are you here for now?" My voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "We came to apologize. No, I know this isn't something we can be forgiven for. I just wanted you to hear why we did something so foolish." I said nothing, waiting for them to speak. My father began, haltingly. "It was all because of our weakness and pride. Chris's company was one of our largest business partners. If we upset him, I was afraid of what would happen to my own company. So I let their behavior go unchecked. They had sold their own daughter's heart for business security." Next, my mother lifted her tear-streaked face. I thought I had to protect Julia. She's always been a handful, spoiled, difficult, but I could never bring myself to abandon her. I told myself Chris was just a temporary mistake, something to overlook. And you, Mandy, you were always the capable one. You never gave us any trouble. Never needed our help. We leaned on that. We told ourselves Mandy will be fine. Mandy will get through it. We deliberately closed our eyes to your pain. I was a failure as a mother. Twisted love. Selfish dependence. That was the whole of their justification for betraying me. I listened to their confessions quietly. What spread through my chest was not anger, but a deep, profound emptiness. I understand your reasons, but they're all about you. What you did to me wasn't just betrayal. It was the deliberate, calculated murder of my heart and my dignity carried out by my entire family. My hand closed over the doorknob. This isn't about forgiveness. The sins you've committed are a cross you'll carry for the rest of your lives. I will no longer be a part of them. At my words, my mother let out a sob, and my father lowered his gaze, silent. There may have been regret in their eyes, but their tears, their remorse came far too late. Go. I said nothing more, closing the door slowly. The click of the lock echoed louder than it should have. I could still hear my mother calling my name from the other side, but I didn't turn back. I can't forgive them so easily. I may never be able to forgive them at all. The wound they left in me is too deep, too permanent. Still, hearing their ugly truths and regrets aloud for the first time seemed to loosen something inside me. It was the final ritual separating their crimes from my life, letting go of them completely. 6 months later, I moved to a small town by the sea. Standing at the window of my new apartment, coffee in hand, I listened to the gentle sound of the waves. The chains that bound me for so many years are gone. My happiness isn't built on their ruin, it's simply that justice has taken its course. From here on, I will walk a life that belongs to no one but me.